Let's watch a CNN panel discussing the recent Supreme Court case discussing gender-affirming care bans for transgender youth in Tennessee, something that will set a huge precedent for what we do nationwide on this issue. And as gender-affirming care is one of the issues of the utmost importance to the LGBTQ community and their fight for equality, I thought that I would line these clips up to debunk a few lies that were told in them and explain the much-needed context of why it's so important.
What is the case for gender-affirming care for minors specifically?
I think it really does revolve around access to health care between a doctor and their patient and the parents of the child. Being able to have access to the type of health care that is available for all types of people, whether they're trans or whether they are cis, which is non-trans. And this court case specifically is asking the question, is it fair to discriminate against transgender people and limit access to care because they are trans? And that's basically what's at the crux of this court case.
Coleman, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a controversial procedure. We've seen in the past few years places like Norway and the UK have reevaluated their guidelines on it, which goes to show that the science is not settled on whether this is the best way to approach gender dysphoria in minors.
I mean, the case for it is the same as the case for chemotherapy in a child with cancer. Children who need health care deserve it all the same as everybody else. And the Constitution also states that all Americans deserve equal protections under the law. So Republicans trying to rip away this much needed protection of health care from children is like unconstitutional. You need to explain why you think it's okay to go against the Constitution to discriminate against a minority group, which if you think about it like that, which is at its crux is what it really is, sounds like a very dangerous precedent to want to set on its face. And the answer can't just be, well, we're protecting children from child castration, because that's not what gender affirming care is for minors. It's just the boogeyman the right created because it's easier to argue against. You know, they sound like the good guy if they're raging against child castration that's being forced on children, rather than if it's just them upset at letting a boy wear a dress and play with Barbies. Now, as to what he said about, well, these other countries have reversed course, this is a misnomer, and it's often used as a red herring pretty consistently by opponents or those who oppose gender affirming care. None of these countries actually changed their position on gender affirming care. People say these things in hope that like nobody knows what's going on in the world or will look it up, like they'll just take them at face value for everything. None of them banned gender affirming care, any of these procedures. They just updated their guidelines on who and how to qualify for the different procedures, something that is the norm for medical treatments.
States are allowed to regulate lots of things. You're not allowed to get a tattoo. You're not allowed to get certain procedures. You're not allowed, states have banned all kinds of medical procedures for minors. And so I think it's an issue that is probably best left with the states at this point in history until the science becomes much more settled on what actually is the very best gold standard scientific protocol for kids with gender dysphoria.
What do you mean?
I think we have that gold standard. This is medical best practice as determined by a number of national and global health organizations that says this type of healthcare is life-saving and medically necessary. So we have the data and the receipts, as it were, to show that this actually is the care that is necessary for young people.
I don't think that's true.
I want to point out here that this is someone with no medical experience or background disagreeing with the science and with all these major medical organizations because it doesn't align with his vibes. And the fact we normalize things like that is kind of insane. Like we're like letting this guy have a platform to speak like he has any bit of a position to take against like the AMA. I mean, the science is super clear. They're also like kind of obfuscating from the truth here a bit and saying that like in pretending or making the conflation that all trans people have gender dysphoria. That's not true. The people who coin gender dysphoria don't even say that's true. But aside from that, I mean, the data on the matter shows both on a basis of the medicines and the interventions that they're using, these are safe, and that they're safe specifically to be used on trans children, where puberty blockers have been used for decades in children with like early onset puberty for like a long list of reasons. And all data on the matter shows that it's safe for kids. It's no less safe than like Tylenol, right? Hormone therapy as well. It's used in children for things like Turner syndrome, hormone deficiencies, and this has been for decades. And you can see from the data that it's safe also. So for these, you have studies from decades, right? Long form studies, medical consensus on the matter. So then we look at, okay, well, how about when it's used on trans youth? And while the studies are shorter in length, 2 to 5 years, there's some that's like, I think 6 or 7. There's less in scales. There's ones that look at kids who receive these interventions as children and then how they fared as adults like 10 years later, but it's not like following them the whole line. But the data that we do have currently suggests that it's very beneficial for trans youth, especially for outcomes later on in their lives versus trans youths who did not receive interventions or trans people who didn't receive interventions when they were children. So if we know that long-term the medicines themselves are safe and all the data we've gathered in the interim shows that it leads to positive outcomes when trans youth use these, why would we ban it? Like, what's the justification?
Is there a case to be made to just wait for minors, just for this population of people under the age of 18, to wait until they are older, they're fully developed, they have agency over their own lives, and can make those decisions, and also for the science to develop much more clarity on the consequences?
I think that's a great question. And can we think of any other circumstance in which medically necessary care is denied to someone until they turn 18?
Based on their sex.
I think the dispute
Is over whether it's the medical best choice. That's precisely the question.
Yeah.
My point in bringing up Western Europe is not to draw a direct link to the ban. It's to say, if some of the most advanced societies in the world have changed their scientific understanding just in the past 2 years, how confident can we be? How confident can you be that your view is perfectly settled science right now?
I want to be very clear here because this is one of those little tricks that people try to do with these kind of hot topic issues that they hope will like hit a note with people who then won't engage with it any further, like past surface level. Like, oh, he's right. You know, if all these countries have changed their guidelines, it must mean that something's up with the treatments. No, all medical procedures have their requirements and guidelines updated and tweaked over time to ensure the most safety and that the people who are qualifying for them should qualify for them. But this doesn't invalidate the medical necessity of these procedures. We wouldn't do that to any other procedure, so why would we do it here? This is, again, it's just how medicine and treatment works. And there is no other treatment where we say, well, this vulnerable group or person does just need to accept these negative outcomes and have this needed care held off because society doesn't agree with it. I'm sorry. Like, where's the freedom in this? Where is the equality for trans people in this? I thought we cared about equality. Equality doesn't just mean that straight white people can do whatever they want. And society doesn't decide if a family is, say, able to make medical decisions for a cis child, right? If a family with a cis child, if that child breaks their leg, it's not like, well, society's not really comfortable with you getting leg surgery. So he's just going to have to deal with like the negative outcomes later on in his life of not being able to walk, right? It's just implied that like, yeah, they have that right to make these decisions. But society does get to decide what's best for trans children. Why? Especially when, if we are granting like, oh, this is a new thing in society, it's a new phenomenon, wouldn't we then think society doesn't understand this to the level that like medical professionals who have had to like learn about this, deal with this their entire careers would be? So why wouldn't we let those people rather than society? I mean, it doesn't, and I don't get either why liberals like Abby Phillips here in this clip, as much as I love Abby Phillips, she's doing it in this clip where they have to try and like both sides everything as if there's like understanding to be brought from both sides of everything. Like, no, I'm not going to both sides someone's human rights. I'm sorry. I'm never going to hear out the reasons why you think a group of people deserve discrimination. Like, the minority's rights don't come at the discretion of the majority's comfort. And this is something the right just vehemently disagrees with, and that should be scary for anyone. Inclusion is the basis of equality, which is a human right. So the burden here needs to fall on those who are trying to exclude. And this is just the cycle of fascism anyway. I wish more people could pick up on these patterns where those in control, those in power just cycle through these minority groups they can oppress as long as the masses will let them, until they have to then move on to the next. Black people, gays, women, immigrants, trans people. Like, it won't end, and as long as you let it continue, it will. And if you feel high and mighty allowing this to happen and looking down on the next man, just think how long it might be until it's your group that is subject to this. And you don't want to ask for sympathy once it's too late.